Willow Creek, Tennessee, is a small town nestled between gentle hills, where time seems to slow down to make room for a peaceful way of life. That morning, the sun had just peeked out, casting faint golden rays on the old cobblestone streets, where pastel-painted wooden houses stood still like still-life paintings. The chirping of sparrows echoed from the branches of old oak trees, mingling with the scent of freshly baked bread wafting from Mrs. Ellie's shop at the corner. A few residents leisurely walked their dogs, while Hank, the newspaper delivery guy, pedaled his rickety bike through the neighborhoods, whistling a tune that had no name. This is Willow Creek, a place where people could live their whole lives without worrying about anything other than whether the rain might soak the firewood outside. Edna Harper, a 90-year-old woman with silvery white hair neatly tied back with small black clip, drives her old Chevrolet Impala down the main road to Danny's gas station. The faded silver-blue car, marked with scratches from years gone by, still runs smoothly, like a loyal old friend who never abandons her. Edna pulls up to pump number 3, the one she's always chosen for nearly 40 years, and slowly steps out. Her hands are thin, with skin wrinkled like dry bark, yet they maintain an astonishing steadiness as she grips the door handle. She wears a thin gray sweater, simple black pants, and white sneakers faded with time. On her face, her bright brown eyes shine behind thick glasses, as if they're seeing through everything, from the passing cars to secrets no one would suspect. "Good morning, Mrs. Harper." Danny, the 22-year-old young man working at the gas station, waved from behind the counter. His smile was bright, revealing a perfect set of teeth, his eyes sparkling with the innocence of youth. "How's it going today? Filling up the tank as usual?" "Just fill it up, Danny," Edna replied, her voice warm and carrying a soft southern twang that you often hear around these parts. She walked over the gas pump, each step slow but deliberate, as if every movement was calculated in advance. As the nozzle began to pump, she leaned against the Impala, taking a deep breath of the gasoline mixed with the fresh morning air. In her mind, she quietly rearranged her schedule for the day. A 10 a.m. meeting with the Veterans Association at the community center, then a stop at Mr. Henry's grocery store to pick up some food for the week, and finally, back home to knit by the window as usual. A normal day, nothing out of the ordinary, or at least, that's what Edna thought as the gentle sunlight still shone down. She stood there, holding the gas nozzle, her eyes absently watching the flow of people along the main road. Mr. Charlie, the town's gardener, was pushing a lawnmower across, his straw hat nearly covering his suntan face. Mary, the elementary school teacher, stopped on the other side of the road to tie her little boy's shoelaces. The sound of a logging truck's engine echoed from a distance, blending into the steady rhythm of Willow Creek. Edna gave a slight smile, a discreet one only she understood. She loved these quiet mornings, peaceful and not too noisy, just enough for her to feel the life still flowing through every nook and cranny of the town she had called home for so many years. But then, another sound interrupted her train of thought. At first, it was just a faint rumble, like summer thunder echoing from the horizon. Edna furrowed her brow, her hands freezing on the gas pump. The sound grew louder, sharper, carrying something fierce, almost threatening. She didn't turn around immediately. Instead, she glanced through the window of the Impala, where reflections of figures approaching from the end of the road were visible. 5 motorcycles, then 10, then 15 rolled into the station's lot, their chrome gleaming under the sun like sharp blades. The roar of their engines drowned out all other sounds, from the chirping of birds to the distant hum of traffic, like a pack of wild animals invading the peaceful territory of Willow Creek. That's the Iron Reapers, a notorious motorcycle gang in the area, who've turned Willow Creek into their playground for the past few months. They appear like ghosts, spreading fear with their shiny black leather jackets, the fierce tattoos covering their arms and their cold, unyielding stares. The leader is Razor, a tall guy with a bushy beard, his narrow eyes like a blade hidden under the brim of his helmet. His leather vest is covered with patches, all skulls, flames, and scribbled words that you don't need to read to know they represent violence and recklessness. Razor isn't just a thug. He's a symbol of the fear that the Iron Reapers have instilled in this town, from the small shops forced into protection to the roads that are no longer safe after dark. Edna kept her hand steady on the gas pump, not trembling at all. She watched them through the glass, her sharp eyes scanning each man as they dismounted from their motorcycles. She recognized a few faces from the group that had caused trouble at Ellie's Cafe a few weeks back, harassing customers and smashing furniture just to prove they could do whatever they wanted. But today, they picked the wrong person to mess with. Razor stepped off his bike, his heavy boots thudding ominously on the concrete with a menacing thud-thud. He approached Edna, his eyes locked on her like a wolf sniffing out an easy prey. His cronies behind him snickered, their eyes gleaming with amusement at the sight of a small old lady standing alone at the gas station. Well, what do we have here? Razor sneered, his voice hoarse and dripping with mockery. An old lady out for a morning stroll, shining bright as ever. The laughter of the Iron Reapers echoed, like a discordant choir of folks reveling in a cruel prank. He tilted his head, eyeing Edna from head to toe, as if assessing whether she was worth his time. Edna didn't respond right away. She lifted the gas nozzle out of the tank and placed it back on the pump with a slow, almost defiant motion. "I'm just filling up," she said, her voice steady, showing no fear, as if the roaring motorcycles were just a bunch of noisy kids. No need to make a fuss. Razor smirked, revealing a set of teeth-stained yellow from cigarettes and beer. He stepped closer, close enough for Edna to smell the scent of motor oil, tobacco, and sweat emanating from him. "Don't you know whose turf this is now, old lady?" he said, his voice lowering menacingly. "The Iron Reapers control Willow Creek now. Everything here, including this run-down gas station, belongs to us. You should feel lucky we're letting you stand here." Another guy in the group, tall and lanky with a scruffy beard and an eagle tattoo on his neck, stepped closer, his eyes darting around as if looking for something to tease. He glanced down at Edna's license plate, where the words Vietnam veteran were etched faintly but still clearly visible in sunlight. "Hey, Razor, check this out," he shouted, his voice full of excitement. "This old lady claims to be a veteran. She must have been making coffee for the soldiers on the battlefield back then, right? Or maybe sewing their uniforms." Laughter erupted again, louder, more malicious, echoing throughout the gas station lot like a raging wave. Razor leaned in close to Edna's face, his hot breath filling the air between them. "A veteran, huh?" he sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I bet you only know how to hold a spoon to stir your coffee, right, old lady? Don't pretend to be tough with us. No one here believes it." Something stirred gently within Edna, deep inside. A distant memory flashed by like lightning, the roar of helicopter engines in a rainforest downpour, the red glow of fire from downed tanks, and the screams of comrades echoing through the night. But her face showed no change. She stared straight into Razor's eyes, her gaze sharp as a razor, slicing through his arrogance. "I serve this country," she said, her voice low but firm as a nail driven into wood. Each word resounding like a decoration. "What have you done besides bothering decent people?" The atmosphere suddenly grew heavy. The laughter of the Iron Reapers cut off, as if someone had choked at midair. Razor furrowed his brow, the arrogance on his face momentarily shaken by Edna's response. But then he quickly regained his menacing demeanor, his eyes flashing a dangerous glint. "You speak well," he growled, taking another step forward, his boots stomping hard on the ground as if to intimidate the very air around them. "But here you're nothing. Willow Creek belongs to us now, and if you're smart, you'll know how to bow your head and live through the day." Edna stood tall, her slender shoulders as sturdy as an old oak tree, unwavering in the face of storm. She looked at Razor, her gaze unflinching. "You should leave," she said, her voice calm yet carrying a hidden strength, like a deep river beneath a thin layer of ice. "I have things to do, and you're in my way." Razor let out a laugh, this time a menacing snarl, like the growl of an enraged beast. He signaled to his gang, and immediately they spread out, forming a loose circle around Edna's Impala. Danny, from inside the gas station, turned pale, his hand quickly grabbing the landline phone behind the counter to call the police. But Edna knew well that the police in Willow Creek couldn't do much against the Iron Reapers. They had spread fear throughout the town for too long. From the street vendors to the families living on the outskirts, no one dared to stand up against them. "Where do you think you're going in such a hurry, old lady?" Razor said, his voice lowering to a dangerous growl. He raised his hand to stop Edna from opening the car door, his large hand slamming hard against the door, making a loud bang like a gunshot, echoing throughout the gas station lot. This isn't your place anymore. If you want to live peacefully, learn to behave. We don't like stubborn people. Edna didn't blink. She stood there, tiny amidst a circle of towering men, but the air around her seemed to shift. There was something in her eyes, not fear, not anger, but chilling calmness, like the sky before a massive storm. "I've faced things that would send kids like you running home crying," she said, each word clear and sharp as a knife slicing through the tense air. "Now get out of my way. I have a meeting to get to." Razor froze, just for a fleeting moment, but then he gritted his teeth, his hand grabbing Edna's arm with enough force to make someone scream in pain. His fingers dug into her flesh, leaving faint red marks on her wrinkled skin. "You want to learn some respect?" he roared, his voice trembling with anger. "I'll teach you, right here, right now. Let's see how long you can stay stubborn." The Iron Reapers started to whoop and holler, their laughter echoing throughout the gas station, drowning out the distant traffic noise. Danny stood frozen in the station, his hand trembling as he clutched his phone, sweat rolling down his forehead while he dialed the police. But he knew that even if the police showed up, they wouldn't dare do anything more than watch from a distance. The Iron Reapers weren't just a gang. They were a force that Willow Creek had let grow stronger with each passing day. The morning sunlight still shone down, but the space was now enveloped in an invisible darkness, a darkness of threat, of fear rising like an undercurrent. Edna didn't complain, didn't struggle. She just looked at Razor, her gaze unwavering, as if she was seeing right through him, into a place he could never understand. "Do you think this makes you strong?" she asked, her voice still steady, but now with a sharper edge, like a knife cutting through the heavy air. "You're wrong, kid. True strength isn't something you can hold or scream to prove. It's here." She gently touched her chest, right over her heart. "And you don't have any of it." Razor let go, not because of Edna's words, but because of the way she looked at him, as if she knew something he didn't, as if she held a secret powerful enough to make him tremble if it were revealed. He took a step back, but his eyes still blazed, his hand clenched into a fist. "You just made a big mistake, old lady," he said, his voice trembling with anger mixed with a hint of unease. "This is my turf, and I'll make sure you remember that. No one in Willow Creek dares to speak out against the Iron Reapers and stay safe." Edna turned around, slowly opening the car door, as if nothing had happened. But inside her, a smoldering fire was beginning to blaze not with anger, but with determination. She had lived through much darker days than this, from nights filled with bombs and bullets to facing death just inches away. She knew this wasn't the first time she had to stand up against bullies, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. As Edna settled into her car, she fired up the engine, and the roar of the Impala sounded like a small challenge amidst the fury of the motorcycles. She glanced at Razor through the rearview mirror. He was still standing there, his eyes blazing, his fist clenched as if he wanted to smash something to vent his anger. But Edna didn't care. She knew something that Razor and the Iron Reapers were completely unaware that they had just messed with the wrong person, and that this story was not going to end the way they thought. The Impala rolled out of the gas station, leaving the Iron Reapers in a cloud of dust and their own roaring engines. Danny dropped the phone onto the counter, letting out a sigh of relief, but a vague sense of worry still lingered in his heart. He watched Edna's car disappear around the corner, wondering what would happen next. Meanwhile, as Edna drove the familiar streets of Willow Creek, only one thought occupied her mind. Today was the day everything would change. Not because she wanted it to, but because she had to make it happen. The sun still shone down on Willow Creek, but the air had changed. A storm was coming, not from the sky, but from the determination of a 90-year-old woman no one expected. Razor and the Iron Reapers thought they had won, that they had scared Edna, but they were wrong. Their biggest mistake wasn't confronting her, but thinking she would let them continue their rampage unchecked. And as Edna turned the steering wheel, heading towards the community center, she knew this was just the beginning of the battle she had been familiar with for a very long time. Edna Harper's Chevrolet Impala rolled away from Danny's gas station, leaving behind the roar of the Iron Reapers and Razor's fiery glare in the swirling dust. The main road of Willow Creek appeared ahead, as peaceful as ever with rows of old oak trees casting their shade onto the cobblestone street, and a few townsfolk leisurely strolling under the early morning sun. Old Charlie, the town gardener, pushed his lawnmower across the street, his straw hat nearly covering his suntanned face. Mary, the elementary school teacher, knelt down to tie her young son's shoelaces across the road, softly humming a gentle lullaby. But in Edna's heart, that peace was only superficial. The recent confrontation with Razor had stirred something deep within her, a smoldering fire she knew wouldn't be easily extinguished. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her thin but strong hand steady, her sharp eyes scanning the rearview mirror as if to make sure the Iron Reapers weren't following. The Impala's engine hummed steadily, but it brought to mind another sound for her, the whirring of helicopter blades slicing through the rain in the jungle, the clanging of metal in air thick with the smell of burning. Edna closed her eyes briefly, not to push away the memories, but to embrace them. Razor and his gang thought she was just a frail old woman, an easy target to tease and threaten. They scoffed at the Vietnam vet decal on her license plate, as if it were just a joke, but they didn't know and perhaps never would understand that Edna Harper was once someone even the toughest would respect, someone who had faced nightmares they could only dare to imagine in their worst dreams. As the car turned onto the small road leading to the Willow Creek Community Center, Edna let her mind drift back over 5 decades to 1967, amidst the darkest days of the Vietnam War. Back then, she wasn't a 90-year-old woman with silver hair sitting in this old Impala. She was Lieutenant Edna Harper, a 32-year-old U.S. Army helicopter pilot, one of the few women entrusted with flying into the most dangerous combat zones in South Vietnam. They called her the Eagle of Dong Nai, a nickname Edna didn't much care for, because she never saw herself as a hero. But with over 200 successful rescue missions beyond enemy lines, she had become a legend in the eyes of the soldiers who served with her, a symbol of survival, of courage, and of hope amidst those dark times. Edna remembered the first night she flew the UH, one Huey over flooded rice fields near the Dong Nai River, under a pitch-black sky torn apart by the light of artillery shells and distant lightning. The rain was pouring down like crazy. Visibility was almost zero, but through the crackling radio in the cockpit, she heard the cries for help from a platoon trapped after an enemy ambush. Her commanding officer, Captain Reynolds, roared over the radio, "That's suicide, Harper. No one flies in this weather. Turn back now." But Edna didn't turn back. She pushed the control stick, her hands gripping it so tight they went numb, her eyes glued to the darkness, searching for the slightest signs of life. Finally, she landed amidst the gunfire, the helicopter's rotors slicing through the air, and pulled 6 soldiers aboard before taking off under a hail of bullets. When she returned to base, the Huey had been hit by more than 10 bullets, but not a single person on board was injured. Captain Reynolds later just shook his head, looking at her with a mix of anger and admiration. "You're crazy, Harper," he said, but Edna just shrugged. To her, it wasn't crazy. It was what needed to be done. Edna pulled up in front of the community center, a low wooden building with a faded sign that read Veterans Association, established 1946. She turned off the engine, sat quietly in the car for a while, letting memories flood back like an old movie played in slow motion. She remembered those days not just for the times flying through gunfire, but also for the rare moments of peace between missions. She remembered the nights spent by the campfire with her comrades, sharing cheap cigarettes and stories about their families back home. She remembered Jimmy Tate's smile, a young pilot who had flown with her, who fell during a mission that Edna couldn't reach in time to save. And she remembered the feeling of her hand on the controls, when every decision she made was a line between life and death for the soldiers below. Edna opened the car door, stepped out, her white sneakers touching the gravel surface of the parking lot. The fresh air of Willow Creek filled her lungs, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and a hint of flowers from someone's nearby garden. But in her mind, she still smelled the smoke, gunpowder, and engine oil from her days in Vietnam. Edna didn't like sharing those stories with outsiders, not because she was ashamed, but because she didn't think she was anything special. To her, it was just a job, the right thing to do amidst overwhelming wrongs. But now, with Razor and the Iron Reapers daring to lay hands on her, daring to mock the past she had bled to protect, Edna felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a small flame, not of anger, but of determination. They thought she was weak. They were about to see just how strong she could be, in a way they never expected. She stepped into the community center, where familiar faces were already seated around a long table in the simple room. Mr. Walter, a World War II veteran with snow-white hair, was sipping coffee from his old porcelain mug that he always brought with him. Jenny, who had served in Iraq, sat next to him, flipping through a small notebook filled with handwritten lines. Mr. Frank, a former Marine in Vietnam like Edna, was recounting a story from the old days, his voice deep yet full of life, making the whole group burst into delighted laughter. As Edna walked in, the laughter stopped, and everyone's eyes turned to her not because she was the most special person in the room, but because they sensed something different in her walk, in her eyes today. "Good morning, Edna." Frank spoke first, his voice warm but tinged with curiosity. "You look a bit stressed out. What's up? Don't tell me you had another argument with Ellie at the bakery over who makes the better bread." Edna pulled out a chair and sat down, placing her hands on the table. Her gaze swept over everyone before settling on Frank. She gave a slight smile at his joke, but it quickly faded. "I just ran into some trouble at Danny's gas station," she said, her voice calm but with an undertone that everyone recognized as serious with a hint of danger. "The Iron Reapers think they can push me around." A murmur rippled around the table, like a small wave. Jenny furrowed her brow, her hand pausing on the notebook, her brown eyes reflecting worry. "Iron Reapers? Are those jerks causing trouble again? I heard they forced Mr. Henry at the grocery store to pay protection money last week and threatened to trash the place if he didn't comply. They're controlling the whole town," Walter chimed in, his voice hoarse with age but still full of fury. He set his coffee cup down on the table, his hand trembling, unsure if it was from anger or old age. "The police aren't doing anything, just letting them do whatever they want. Now it's your turn, Edna. Do they dare touch you?" Edna nodded gently, her eyes darkening as if reliving every detail of the confrontation at the gas station. Razor, the ringleader, thought I was just an easy old lady to deal with. He said I only knew how to make coffee during the war, that I was nothing here. She paused, her lips pressed into a tight line, then continued, her voice deeper. "I told him I'd served this country, but he didn't care. He thought the gas station, this whole town, was his. He even dared to grab my arm, threatening to teach me how to respect." Frank burst out laughing, but it wasn't a joyful laugh. It was a laugh of someone who had seen too much stupidity in this world. He leaned forward, his eyes lighting up as if he had just remembered an old story. "Razor, huh? That guy has no idea who he just messed with. Edna, you flew through fire and bullets to save me in Da Nang, remember? If it weren't for you, I'd still be lying in that bomb crater. If he knew about that, he probably would have run away scared instead of standing there barking like a crazy dog." Edna gave a faint smile, but couldn't hide the sharpness in her eyes. She remembered the time she rescued Frank on a rainy night in 1968 near Da Nang, when her helicopter was hit by artillery, the engine screaming, as if it was about to explode in the midst of the storm. Frank was a young Marine back then, only 19 years old, trapped with squad in a bomb crater deep in the jungle. Edna landed amidst a gunfire, the helicopter's rotors tearing through the rain, and pulled him and 4 others onto the aircraft before taking off under a barrage of bullets thick as a net. Her Huey was hit by over 30 rounds. The windshield shattered, but she still managed to bring it back to base safely. Frank never forgot that. Later, he sought her out to thank her, and from then on, they became friends. But Edna never told that story again, unless someone asked her directly, "What are you planning to do with those Iron Reapers?" Jenny asked, her voice full of curiosity but tinged with worry. She closed her notebook, set it down on the table, and clasped her hands together as if waiting for a big answer. "They're not the type to just let things slide, Edna. If you embarrass them at the gas station, they'll come back, and this time it could be much worse. I've seen them trash a guy's car in the suburbs just because he refused to give them money." Edna looked out the window, where the early morning sunlight filtered through the old curtains, casting beams of light on the faded wooden floor. She was silent for a moment, as if pondering something profound. "I'm not looking for trouble," she finally spoke. her voice slow but firm. "But if trouble comes looking for me, I won't run away. I've faced things much scarier than those punks in leather jackets. They're not the North Vietnamese army, not machine guns or napalm bombs. They're just a bunch of thugs with too much time on their hands." Walter nodded, his cloudy eyes brightening a bit as he looked at Edna. "I remember you back in Vietnam. Edna, you flew like nothing in this world could stop you, not rain, not bullets, not even death. I once heard you landed between two crossfires to save a downed pilot, while everyone else said it was suicide. If Razor knew about that, maybe he'd think twice before daring to mock you." Edna didn't respond right away. She was recalling those days, not just the heroic deeds others spoke of, but also the losses she kept locked inside. She remembered the sleepless nights, sitting in the cockpit, her hands gripping the controls until they went numb, her eyes scanning the horizon for soldiers left behind. She remembered the times a helicopter shook from gunfire, the rotor blades screaming as if they were about to break, and emergency landings in deep forests, unsure if she would survive to take off again. She remembered the faces of fallen comrades Jimmy Tate, with a smile as bright as sunshine, who died on a mission Edna couldn't reach in time to save, or Sarah Klein, a young nurse who had flown with her, shot dead while bandaging a wounded soldier. Those memories never left her, but they didn't weaken her, they made her stronger, in a way that Razor and the Iron Reapers would never understand. "They don't know who I am," Edna finally spoke up, her voice deep but carrying an undeniable strength, like the undercurrent beneath a calm ocean. "And maybe it's time they learn a lesson. I don't want war in Willow Creek. Don't want blood spilled on the streets I've called home for 40 years. But they force me to fight. I'll fight in my own way, not with fists, but with what I learned from my days in Vietnam." Frank leaned forward, his eyes sparkling with a mix of curiosity and excitement. "What do you mean? Do you have a plan? Don't tell me you're planning to call in the Air Force to bomb that bunch." Edna subtly curled her lip, a discreet smile that only those who truly understood her could grasp its meaning. "No need for the Air Force, Frank," she said, her voice soft yet brimming with deep confidence. "I've flown through hell and back, dealt with bullies far more dangerous than Razor 100 times over. I know how to handle them, whether in the jungle or on the streets of Willow Creek. But first, I need to make a phone call." Jenny furrowed her brows, her hands gripping the table tighter. "A phone call? Who are you calling, Edna? Are you planning to call the police? Because if that's the case, I'm afraid it's pointless. The police here are more scared of the Iron Reapers than civilians are." Edna didn't answer right away. She stood up and slowly walked over to the old payphone hanging on the wall of the community center, a relic from the 70s that no one had bothered to replace. Her fingers glided over the numbers, a sequence she had memorized for decades, an inseparable part of her memory. In her mind, images of Razor and the Iron Reapers surfaced their arrogance, their mocking laughter, the way his hand gripped her arm as if trying to crush it. But then, another image replaced images of the soldiers who had fought beside her, the ones she vowed never to abandon, whether in war or peace. And among them, there was one she knew wouldn't refuse or call a man who owed her his life. The phone rang from the other end of the line, and Edna waited, her breathing steady like the beat of a helicopter's blades from days gone by. She stood there, small in the simple room of the community center, but in her eyes was a whole sky, the sky of the days she flew through fire and bullets, the sky of the night she brought hope to those who thought they had lost everything. This call would change everything, not just for her, but for all of Willow Creek. Razor thought she was a useless old woman, an easy target for him to toy with, but he was wrong. Edna Harper was not a victim. She was a survivor, a warrior, and now she would be the nightmare of those who dare to challenge her. When the person on the other end of the line picked up, a deep, hoarse voice echoed through the old speaker. "Hello? Who's this?" Edna gave a soft smile, a smile that was light but full of meaning. "Hi, Charlie," she said, her voice deep but firm, like the sound of a helicopter engine starting up before takeoff. "It's me, Edna. I need your help with something. The kids here think they can bully me, and I think it's time they learned a lesson. Out there, the sunlight still shines down on Willow Creek, but in the community center, a new story is beginning. The secret about Edna Harper, the heroic pilot from Vietnam, is about to be revealed. Not through stories or the medals lying still in a wooden box at her home, but through action. And when it happens, the Iron Reapers will realize they just messed with the wrong person, someone that even war couldn't defeat, let alone a gang of thugs on motorcycles. Frank leaned forward, his eyes lighting up as if he'd just heard a big secret. Charlie? You mean Charlie Thunder Grayson? He whispered, loud enough for Jenny and Walter to hear. Jenny furrowed her brow, while Walter nodded slowly, as if a name had just stirred a distant memory. Charlie Grayson was more than just a name in Willow Creek. He was a legend, a former Marine who had fought in Vietnam, now leading a motorcycle crew of seasoned veterans known as the Thunder Riders. If Edna was calling Charlie, this was no longer a small matter. The other end of the line was silent for a moment. Then Charlie's voice came through, this time clearer, mixed with surprise and delight. Edna? Oh my gosh! How long has it been? I thought you were enjoying a peaceful retirement in that little town. Which punks dared to mess with you? His voice still held that distinct southern drawl, but now it was tinged with the hoarseness of age and years of smoking along dusty roads. Edna leaned against the wall, clutching the phone tightly, her gaze fixed on an empty space, as if reliving a distant memory. Iron Reapers, she replied, her voice low but sharp. A bunch of motorcycle thugs who think they own Willow Creek. This morning, they cornered me at Danny's gas station, thinking I was just an easy target, an old lady. Their leader, Razor, even had the guts to grab my arm and threaten to teach me how to respect them. Charlie let out a short, dry laugh over the phone, but it was full of meaning. Razor? That guy? I know him. Just a cocky kid with his head in the clouds. He doesn't know who you are, Edna. If he did, he'd be on his knees apologizing instead of standing there barking nonsense. He paused, then lowered his voice, as if calculating something. What do you need me to do? Just say the word, and the Thunder Riders will be there. Edna nodded slightly, though Charlie couldn't see over the phone. I don't want a war here, Charlie, she said, her voice soft but firm. But if they won't stop, I need you and your team to come and teach them a lesson about not messing with people they shouldn't mess with. This old lady may not fly helicopters anymore, but I still know how to call in reinforcements. Charlie laughed even louder this time, his laughter echoing through the phone speaker, causing Jenny to turn and look at Frank with a curious glance. All right, Edna, he said, his voice full of excitement. Give me an hour to round up the guys. The Thunder Riders will be at Willow Creek before the sun is high. The Iron Reapers won't know what's hitting them until we're standing right in front of them. You just relax. Anyone who owes you a life never forgets. Edna smiled, this time a genuine smile, though still subtle. Thanks, Charlie, she said, then hung up, the click of the receiver sounding like a period marking the beginning of something big. She turned back to the table, where Frank, Jenny, and Walter were looking at her with a mix of astonishment and excitement. The atmosphere in the room suddenly felt lighter, as if the call had blown away the dark clouds left by Razor and the Iron Reapers. Charlie Grayson, Frank repeated, his voice full of admiration. Good grief. Edna, did you call the Thunder Riders here? Razor's gonna pee his pants when he sees them, I bet. He burst out laughing, slapping the table like a kid who just got promised a surprise gift. Jenny furrowed her brows, still trying to catch up. Who are the Thunder Riders? I've heard that name a few times, but I'm not really sure. Are they veterans? Walter nodded, his hand running through his white hair as if trying to sort out his memories. Yeah, Jenny. The Thunder Riders are a motorcycle club made up entirely of vets from Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, you name it. Charlie Grayson is a leader, a Marine vet from Vietnam. Same time as Edna. They're not just a bunch of bikers. They're a unit organized like the military, and no one messes with them without paying the price. If Edna calls them in, the Iron Reapers are in for some big trouble. Edna sat down, her eyes scanning each person once more. I don't want blood to be shed in Willow Creek, she said, her voice low but full of determination. But Razor and the Iron Reapers need to understand that they're not the bosses around here. They think I'm weak, that this town is easy to bully. I called Charlie not to fight, but to show them how wrong they are. Jenny nodded slowly, as if she had just realized something. So, you want to send a message, she said, her voice tinged with admiration. No violence, just real strength. That's right, Edna replied, her eyes lighting up like a small flame that had just been fanned. I've flown through fire and bullets to save people. Faced dangers far worse than Razor 100 times over. If he thinks I'm just a useless old lady, let him keep thinking that until the Thunder Riders show up and snap him out his dream. Frank burst into a big laugh, this time a carefree one, as if he had just shed a heavy burden. I want to see Razor's face when Charlie and his crew show up. He won't know what to do, whether to run away or kneel down and beg for mercy. Edna didn't laugh along. She looked out the window, where the sun had now risen higher, illuminating the familiar streets of Willow Creek. In her mind, memories of Charlie Grayson surfaced, vividly a young man of 25 with tousled brown hair, a suntanned face, and bright eyes that seemed to challenge the world. In 1969, Charlie was a Marine sergeant trapped in a village near Hugh when his unit was brutally ambushed. Edna flew into line of fire, landing on a scorched rice field to pull him and 3 others onto the helicopter. Her chopper took a hit to the rotor, but she still managed to get them to safety. Charlie hugged her as soon as they landed, tears streaming down his dusty face. "I owe you my life, Edna," he said then, and she just nodded. Now, more than 5 decades later, Charlie still kept that promise. The sound of motorcycle engines echoes from a distance, but this time it's not the chaotic roar of the Iron Reapers. It's a different sound, steady, powerful, like thunder rolling in from the horizon. Edna stands up, steps out of the community center, gently pushing the wooden door to look outside. Frank, Jenny, and Walter follow her, their eyes fixed on the end of Willow Creek's main street. From afar, the first silhouettes appear chrome motorcycles gleaming under the sunlight, moving in tight formation like a military unit. Leading the pack is Charlie Grayson, now 77 years old, his white hair flying under his helmet, his broad shoulders still as straight as ever. Behind him are the Thunder Riders, more than 30 of them, each bearing the marks of years of battle, from military patches on their leather vests to their sharp, fearless gazes. Danny, from the gas station a few blocks away, ran up, his face flushed with excitement. "Mrs. Harper," he shouted, his voice hoarse from panting. "I just saw them. A bunch of people on motorcycles. Not the Iron Reapers. They look like they just stepped out of an action movie." "Who are they?" Edna turned back to look at Danny, her eyes gleaming with a subtle pride. "That's the Thunder Riders, Danny," she said, her voice deep but resonant. "They're old friends of mine, and they're here to remind Razor that Willow Creek isn't his playground." Charlie stopped the bike first, dismounted with the confident stride of a man used to the battlefield. He took off his helmet, revealing a face full of wrinkles but still holding the determined look of old. He looked at Edna, flashed a broad smile, then stepped forward to give her a tight, heartfelt hug, full of camaraderie. "Edna Harper," he said, his voice hoarse but warm. "You're as tough as ever. Tell me, where are those Iron Reapers? I want to meet them right now." Edna chuckled softly, patting Charlie on the shoulder. "They'll find out soon enough, Charlie," she said. "But first, let's let them think they're still the big shots until they see you and the Thunder Riders." The early morning sunlight shone down on the Thunder Riders' formation, turning their chrome motorcycles into gleaming streaks on Willow Creek's main road. Charlie Grayson stood next to Edna Harper, the team embrace from moments ago still lingering in the air like an unspoken promise. Behind him, over 30 veterans from the Thunder Riders lined up, their bike engines rumbling steadily, like thunder echoing from an approaching storm. Danny, the young guy from the gas station, stood with his mouth agape, staring at the scene before him, his eyes lighting up as if he'd just witnessed a superhero squad stepping out of the screen. Frank, Jenny, and Walter had also come out of the community center, standing beside Edna, their gazes shifting between awe and excitement. Willow Creek had never seen anything like this before. A seasoned crew, not here to start a fight, but to protect. Charlie turned to Edna, his brown eyes sparkling under the sunlight, still holding the mischievous charm of the young soldier she once knew. "Where did you say the Iron Reapers are?" he asked, his voice hoarse but full of life. "I want to look Razor straight in the eye and ask him what he thinks about messing with the person who saved my life in the jungles of Hugh." Edna pointed down the main street, where Danny's gas station was just a few blocks away. "They were just there less than an hour ago," she said, her voice low but firm. Razor and his goons are probably still lurking around town somewhere, thinking they've scared me and everyone else into submission. But I bet they'll head back to the gas station. They love to show off their power where there's a lot of foot traffic. Charlie nodded, the smile on his lips widening, but his eyes turned cold, like a soldier who had just received orders to go into battle. "Good," he said, patting Edna lightly on the shoulder. "Then we'll meet them right there. Thunder Riders don't like to wait, especially when there's a kid who needs to be taught a lesson." He turned around, signaling to his crew. "Guys, start your engines. We're heading to Danny's gas station and showing those Iron Reapers the price of messing with the wrong people." The sound of engines roared in unison, echoing throughout Willow Creek like a symphony of power and unity. The motorcycles began to move, their formation tight and orderly, as if they were still moving under military command from days long past. Edna stood watching, her hands tucked into the pockets of her gray sweater, her eyes gleaming with a subtle pride. She hadn't called Charlie and the Thunder Riders to show off or to seek revenge. She called them to send a message that Razor and the Iron Reapers needed to engrave deep in their minds. Willow Creek was not a place where they could do whatever they wanted. Danny ran alongside Edna, his feet barely touching the ground with excitement. "Mrs. Harper, I can't believe it," he shouted, his voice cracking over the sound of the engines. "They look like a real army. When did you meet them? And why didn't you tell me about this?" Edna chuckled softly, turning to look at the young man with a gentle yet sharp gaze. "I've known Charlie since the war, Danny," she said, her voice soft like she was telling a story to a grandchild. "He was a young Marine, trapped in the jungle near Hugh. I flew in by helicopter to rescue him and a few others. We've been friends ever since. As for not telling you, I don't like to brag, and I only call them when I really need to." Danny nodded his head vigorously, as if he had just heard a story from an adventure book. "But Mrs. Harper, the Thunder Riders look really scary. I mean, not scary like the Iron Reapers, but scary in a powerful way, like no one would dare to mess with them." He paused, panting. What will Razor do when he sees them? Frank walks in, slaps Danny on the shoulder with a huge grin. What's he gonna do? He'll either run off like a scared dog or stand there, mouth shut in shock. I bet Razor has never seen anyone like Charlie Grayson and the Thunder Riders. He thinks he's the king of Willow Creek, but he's about to find out how wrong he is. Jenny stepped forward, her arms folded across her chest, her eyes still showing a mix of worry and excitement. "But Edna, are you sure?" she asked, her voice low but clear. "I mean, the Thunder Riders look strong, but the Iron Reapers aren't the type to back down easily. If Razor feels challenged in front of the whole town, he might go ballistic and do something stupid. I don't want to see anyone get hurt." Edna turned to Jenny, her eyes softening but still holding an unwavering resolve. "I understand your concerns, Jenny," she said, her voice warm and comforting like a mother reassuring her child. "I don't want anyone to get hurt, not Danny, not the folks here, and not even the Iron Reapers, no matter how much they might deserve it. But sometimes, to stop evil, you have to show it a greater strength. The Thunder Riders aren't here to fight, they're here to stand firm, to remind Razor that he's not the strongest one around." Charlie, standing a few steps away, heard Edna's words and nodded in agreement. He turned around, shouting loudly to be heard over the engine noise. "Listen up, brothers. We didn't come to Willow Creek to spill blood. We came protect, to show those Iron Reapers kids that they picked the wrong people to mess with. Edna Harper is one of our heroes, and no one touches her without paying a price." Cheers erupted from the Thunder Riders, a powerful, united sound, like the battle cry of an army. They weren't just a bunch of bikers. They were survivors of war who had faced death and overcome it, and now they brought that spirit to Willow Creek. Edna stood watching, feeling as though a part of the part that had flown through gunfire, that had gripped the controls in the storm, was coming alive again. She was no longer a helicopter pilot, but she was still a warrior, and Charlie and the Thunder Riders were living proof of that. Charlie's motorcycle gang rolled towards Danny's gas station, the roar of their engines echoing to the town's narrow streets, causing a few locals to peek out their windows or pause on the sidewalk to watch. Old Man Henry, the owner of the grocery store, stood in front of his shop, his aged eyes wide as he watched the Thunder Riders zoom by. Mary, the elementary school teacher, pulled her young son close, but the smile on her face showed she wasn't scared, she was curious, and maybe even hopeful. For this moment, Willow Creek was no longer just a small town threatened by the Iron Reapers. It was a place coming to life, thanks to Edna's fateful call. When the Thunder Riders reached the gas station, Charlie signaled for the team to stop, their bikes forming a horizontal line, blocking the entrance like a steel wall. Danny followed behind, standing next to Edna, his breath heavy with excitement. "Mrs. Harper, look at them," he whispered. "They look ready to crush anything that gets in their way." Edna nodded, her eyes fixed on Charlie as he stepped out of the truck, his old army boots hitting the concrete with a solid thud. "We'll wait here," Charlie shouted, his voice echoing across the gas station lot. "If Razor and the Iron Reapers want to play their bullying games, let them come. We'll show them that messing with an old lady like Edna Harper is the biggest mistake of their lives." The Thunder Riders shouted in unison, their voices booming like thunder across the serene sky of Willow Creek. Edna stood there, small amidst Charlie's mighty formation, but inside her, a sense of certainty surged, a feeling of a pilot who had flown through hell, now summoning season nights to protect her home. Razor and the Iron Reapers might think they're the strong ones, but they're about to face a power they never imagined, the power of loyalty, of memories, and of those who never forget a life saved. The roar of the Thunder Riders' engines echoes through Danny's gas station lot, a steady, powerful sound like thunder heralding an approaching storm about to hit Willow Creek. Charlie Grayson stands in the middle of the formation, his old army boots stomping on the concrete, his eyes scanning the main road like a soldier assessing a battlefield. Edna Harper stands beside him, small but defiant in her gray sweater, her sharp brown eyes hidden behind thick glasses, watching each of the Thunder Riders' motorcycles line up side by side, blocking the entrance to the gas station like an impenetrable steel wall. Danny runs around, his legs wobbly with excitement and nervousness, his face flushed as he looks at the seasoned crew that Edna just summoned. Frank, Jenny, and Walter stand behind, their eyes gleaming with hope that Charlie and the Thunder Riders' arrival will put an end to the days of being threatened by the Iron Reapers. Charlie turned to Edna, a mischievous smile playing on his lips, but his eyes serious. "You said Razor likes to show off in front of a crowd, right?" he asked, hands on his hips, his voice hoarse over the sound of the engines. "Well, that's perfect. We'll wait for him right here, so all of Willow Creek can seize nothing when he's standing in front of us." Edna nodded, her eyes gleaming with a hint of pride. "He'll come," she said, her voice deep but certain like a prophecy. "Razor isn't the type to sit still when challenged. He thinks he's the king of this town, and he'll come back to prove it, if only to regain the ego I bruised at the gas station this morning." Danny burst in, his voice high with excitement. "Mrs. Harper, I bet Razor's going to be shocked when he sees the Thunder Riders. He thinks you're just some regular old lady, but now, oh my gosh, look at them!" He points toward the formation of over 30 Thunder Riders, each exuding the tough demeanor of veterans who face life and death. Their leather vests are covered with military badges, from units in Vietnam to Iraq, their eyes sharp but not fierce, like soldiers who know the value of peace but won't hesitate to fight when necessary. Charlie burst into laughter, slapping Danny on the back, so hard he nearly fell over. "This kid's got it, Edna," he said, his voice full of delight. "He won't just be shocked, he'll be running scared when he sees us. But if he dares to stick around, all the better. I want to look that punk straight in the eye and ask him what he was thinking, messing with the person who pulled me out of hell and Hugh." Edna didn't join in the laughter. She turned back to look at the main road of Willow Creek, where the early morning sunlight still shone on the peaceful wooden houses, the old oak trees swaying in the gentle breeze. But she knew that peace was only temporary. Razor and the Iron Reapers wouldn't let things slide easily. The confrontation at the gas station this morning had embarrassed him. And for a guy like Razor, pride was more important than life itself. He would come back, not to apologize, but to get revenge, and this time he'd bring his whole gang to prove that he was still the strongest one around here. The sound of another motorcycle engine roared from a distance, not steady like the Thunder Riders, but chaotic and fierce, like the growl of a pack of wild animals provoked. Edna turned her head, her eyes narrowing as she looked down the road. Charlie heard it too. He signaled the Thunder Riders to stay quiet, their motorcycles stopping their roar, leaving the space filled with tense silence. Danny swallowed hard, his hands clenched into fists. "They're here," he whispered, his voice trembling but not from fear. He believed in Edna, believed in Charlie, believed in the people standing in front of him. From the end of the road, the silhouettes of the Iron Reapers emerged 15 motorcycles, their chrome gleaming under the sun. But instead of the beauty of the Thunder Riders, they exuded the ferocity of outlaws. Razor led the pack, his broad shoulders tense under his leather jacket, his narrow eyes blazing as he spotted the formation blocking the gas station. He stopped his bike about 20 yards from the Thunder Riders, his gang spreading out behind him, forming a loose arc like a pack of wolves ready to strike. The sound of their engines faded, leaving a heavy atmosphere filled with the tense silence between the two groups. Razor stepped out of the car, his boots hitting the pavement with a menacing thud. He looked at Edna, then at Charlie, and then scanned the Thunder Riders, his eyes flickering between anger and confusion. "What the hell is going on here?" he growled, his hoarse voice echoing across the gas station lot. "Old lady, why did you call these guys here? You think they can scare me?" Charlie stepped forward, his stride as solid as an unmovable rock. He stopped a few steps away from Razor, his cold brown eyes staring straight at the man who was decades younger than him. "Your name's Razor, right?" Charlie said, his voice deep but sharp as a knife. "I'm Charlie Grayson, and these are the Thunder Riders. We're here because of Edna Harper, the woman you dared to mess with this morning. You think bullying an old lady is the way to be king around here? You're dead wrong, kid." Razor gritted his teeth, his hand clenched into a fist, but his eyes showed a hint of unease as he looked at the Thunder Riders line up behind Charlie. "Who the hell are you guys to stick your noses in my business?" he growled, try to keep up his tough act. "Willow Creek is Iron Reaper's turf. This old lady brought trouble on herself by mouthing off against me, and now I'm going to make her regret it, along with your bunch of washed-up old bikers." Charlie let out a short, dry laugh, full of contempt. "Old, huh?" he said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "We're old, sure, but we've fought through things you'd only dare to dream about in your worst nightmares. Edna Harper once flew a helicopter through gunfire to save my life, and hundreds of others in Vietnam. And you're just a punk playing king with your gang of thugs. If you dare lay a hand on her again, you'll see that we're not just all talk." The air was tense like a taut string. Razor took a step back, his gaze sweeping over the Thunder Riders, those stern faces, those hands that had once held guns, those unblinking eyes staring back at him. Edna stepped forward, standing next to Charlie, her voice ringing out in the silence. "Razor, I told you this morning, real strength isn't something you can shout about or prove with your fists. The Thunder Riders aren't here to fight you, they're here to show you that Willow Creek doesn't belong to you." Razor roared, his finger pointing straight at Edna. "You think those words and this crowd will scare me?" he bellowed, his voice trembling with rage. "The Iron Reapers bow to no one. This is my turf, and I'll make all of you pay." He signaled to his gang, and immediately the engines of the Iron Reapers roared to life, not to attack, but to retreat, a sign that he wasn't ready to face the Thunder Riders head-on, at least not yet. Charlie turned to Edna, the smile returning to his lips. "He ran off," he said, his voice full of delight. "But I bet he won't stay quiet. He'll be back, and this time he might bring an even bigger crowd." Edna nodded, her eyes darkening. "I know," she said, her voice deep but unwavering. "But this time, we're not just the Thunder Riders. We got Willow Creek, too." She turned to look at Danny, Frank, Jenny, and Walter, then out at the main road where a few townsfolk had started to gather in the distance, their eyes no longer filled with fear, but with curiosity, even hope. Danny stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "Mrs. Harper, I'm going to tell everyone here about this. They need to know what you and the Thunder Riders are doing, not to be scared, but to stand up with you." He ran toward the gas station, starting to shout loudly to a few passers-by. "Hey, everyone, come over here and see. Mrs. Harper and the Thunder Riders are chasing the Iron Reapers away." Frank claps his hands, laughing heartily. "What a clever kid. Edna, you've woken up the whole town. Razor has no idea what he's just set off." Edna didn't respond right away. She watched the Iron Reapers disappear around the corner, knowing that the real battle had just begun. The Thunder Riders had brought the initial strength, but to reclaim the soul of Willow Creek, she needed the whole town to rise up, from people like Danny, Mr. Henry, Sister Mary, to the other ordinary folks. Razor might come back with more people, with more ferocity, but Edna knew this fight was not just about physical strength. It was about spirit, about faith, and about community. Charlie placed his hand on her shoulder, his voice deepening but full of determination. "You're right, Edna. This isn't just about you or the Thunder Riders anymore. This is about all of Willow Creek. We'll stay, we'll protect this town, and we'll show Razor that he can't win when an entire community stands up against him." Edna nodded, her eyes lighting up like a flame that had just been fanned. "Then let's get started," she said. "Let Willow Creek know that we're not afraid, and let Razor know that he picked the wrong enemy." The morning sunlight shone down on Danny's gas station, where the Thunder Rider stood firm like a steel wall on Willow Creek's main road. Edna Harper stood next to Charlie Grayson, her eyes following the silhouettes of the Iron Reapers as they disappeared around the corner, their chaotic engine noise fading into the air. Razor retreated, but Edna knew it wasn't the end. He wasn't the type to give up easily, and his bruised ego would soon turn into a fiercer flame. Danny was still running around, shouting to a few passers-by, his voice echoing to the pastel wooden houses. "Hey, everyone!" Mrs. Harper and the Thunder Riders just chased the Iron Reapers away. "Come check it out." Frank burst into laughter beside him, clapping as if he had just watched a great play, while Jenny and Walter exchanged glances mixed with hope and concern. The battle for the soul of Willow Creek had just begun, and Edna understood that to win, she needed more than the Thunder Riders. She needed the whole town to stand up. Charlie turned to Edna, his hand on her shoulder, his voice deep but full of determination. "He'll be back, Edna," he said, his sharp brown eyes scanning the road. "Razor isn't the type to lose quietly. He'll gather more people, try to do something to reclaim what he thinks is his honor. But we'll be here, ready? The Thunder Riders aren't going anywhere until Willow Creek is safe." Edna nodded, her eyes lighting up like a flame just reignited from ashes. "I know, Charlie," she replied, her voice deep but unwavering. "He won't stop, but neither will we. And this time, I want the whole town to stand up with us. If Razor thinks he can bully us one by one, we'll show him he can't stand against an entire community." Danny stopped next to Edna, his breath heavy from running back and forth. "Mrs. Harper, I've talked to Mr. Henry and a few others," he said, his voice high with excitement. "They want to know what's going on. Mr. Henry even said he's ready to stand with you if needed. I think everyone here just needs a reason to not be scared anymore." Frank burst in, a grin stretching from ear to ear. "That kid Danny was right. Edna, you've woken up the whole town in just one morning. Razor has no idea what he's just sparked. Next time he comes back, he won't just be facing the Thunder Riders, but all of Willow Creek too." Jenny stepped forward, her arms crossed over her chest, her voice soft but tinged with concern. "I agree that people are starting to hope," she said, her eyes filled with worry as she looked at Edna. "But Edna, Razor isn't the type to take a loss without striking back. He might do something worse than just vandalism, threats, or even attack someone to set an example. Are you sure we can protect everyone?" Edna turned to Jenny, her eyes softening like a mother reassuring her child. "No one can ever be completely sure, Jenny," she said, her voice warm but firm. "I once flew through gunfire without knowing if I'd survive to land. But I know one thing. If we don't stand up now, Razor will keep riding roughshod over this town forever. The Thunder Riders are just the beginning, but all of Willow Creek needs to be the real strength." Charlie nodded, his hand clenched into a fist. "Edna's right," he shouted, his voice echoing across the gas station lot for all the Thunder Riders to hear. "We're not just here to chase those kids away, we're here to protect this place, to show everyone that they don't need to live in fear anymore. Brothers, are you ready?" The unified chant of the Thunder Riders resounded, powerful like thunder in a clear sky, causing a few distant onlookers to jump and turn to look. Edna stood still, feeling as if a part of her memories was coming back to life. Those days when she flew helicopters over jungle, not just to save people, but also to bring hope. Now, she's no longer in the cockpit, but she's still the guide, and Charlie and the Thunder Riders are her strong arm. But that peace didn't last long. Less than an hour later, as the sun rose higher, another sound echoed from the outskirts of Willow Creek. The roar of motorcycle engines, this time louder, more chaotic, like a swarm of bees breaking free from their hive. Danny ran out of the gas station, his face turning pale as he looked into the distance. "Mrs. Harper, they're back!" he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "But this time there are more of them. I see at least 25 bikes, maybe even more." Charlie stepped up beside Edna, his eyes narrowing as he looked down the road. "He's called in more guys," he said, his voice low but fearless. "Razor won't go down easy. Brothers, get on your bikes. We'll show them that Thunder Riders never back down." Edna placed her hand on Charlie's shoulder, her voice calm but sharp. "Hold on, Charlie," she said. "Let them get closer. I want to see clearly what they're up to, and I want everyone here to see exactly who they are." The Iron Reapers showed up. Not just a 15 from this morning, but over 30 of them. A chaotic yet terrifying formation with their shiny black leather jackets and engines roaring like they wanted to tear the air apart. Razor led the charge, his face flushed with anger, his eyes blazing as he spotted the Thunder Riders still blocking the gas station. He stopped his bike about 10 yards from Charlie's crew, his gang spreading out behind him, some guys gripping baseball bats, others holding long steel bars. This was no longer a confrontation of words. This was a declaration of war. Razor stepped out of the car, his boots slamming hard onto the pavement, his voice roaring like thunder. "Old lady, you think calling these guys here is going to cut it?" he bellowed, pointing straight at Edna. "This is Willow Creek, Iron Reaper's turf. You and your old biker gang are going to pay for daring to challenge me. I'll burn this gas station down, smash every store, and make this whole town beg me for mercy." Charlie stepped up, standing protectively in front of Edna, his gaze as cold as steel. "What do you want to burn, kid?" he growled, his hand clenching into a fist. "Who do you think you are, daring to make threats here? I've seen punks like you in Vietnam, all talk but no guts. The Thunder Riders aren't afraid of you, and Willow Creek won't be either." Razor burst into a loud, maniacal, and malicious laugh. "You think those words scare me, old man?" he yelled back, signaling his gang to move forward. "The Iron Reapers aren't just me. I've called in brothers from 2 other gangs in the next county. We're bigger, we're stronger, and I'll show you and that old lady the price of standing against me." The shouts of the Iron Reapers echoed, their minions advancing, swinging bats and iron bars high, the roar of engines sounding like a battle hymn. Danny stepped back, his hands trembling, but he stood by Edna, his gaze determined. "Mrs. Harper, there are too many of them," he whispered, his voice shaky. Edna placed her hand on Danny's shoulder, her voice calm yet powerful. "Don't be scared, Danny," she said. "Strength doesn't come from numbers. Courage does. And we've got that." She turned to Charlie. "Don't strike first. Let them see we're not afraid, and let this town see us stand firm." Charlie nodded, signaling the Thunder Riders to hold their positions. They stood still, not a single one blinking, not a single one backing down, like an army of steel ready to face anything. But then, something unexpected happened from the main road. The sound of footsteps echoed, not from motorcycles, but from the people of Willow Creek. Mr. Henry, the grocery store owner, stepped out first, holding a long broom, his aged face full of determination. Ms. Mary, the elementary school teacher, followed, pulling along a few other parents, their eyes no longer filled with fear, but with anger. Mr. Hank, the newspaper delivery man, rode up on his bike, stopping next to Danny with a strained yet resilient smile. "Mrs. Harper," Mr. Henry shouted, his voice trembling but clear. "We've heard everything Danny said. If you and the Thunder Riders stand up against the Iron Reapers, then we'll stand with you. We're tired of living in fear." Whispers spread, and from every nook and cranny of Willow Creek, people began to emerge, some with brooms, some with wooden sticks, but all sharing a common spirit. They refused to bow down any longer. Razor turned around, his eyes flickering as he saw the growing crowd behind the Thunder Riders. He roared, but his voice now tinged with panic. "You think this is a win? The Iron Reapers will crush you all." Charlie stepped closer, his voice as cold as ice. Go ahead and try, kid, he said. You're not just up against the Thunder Riders, you're up against all of Willow Creek. And I bet you don't have the guts to do it. Edna stepped forward, standing next to Charlie, her eyes locked on Razor. You want a war, Razor? She said, her voice ringing out like a declaration. You'll lose. Not because we're stronger with our fists, but because we're stronger with our hearts. Willow Creek doesn't belong to you, it belongs to us, and we will protect it. Razor stepped back, his eyes blazing but his hands trembling as he looked at the crowd behind Edna and the Thunder Riders. This isn't over yet, he roared, jumping onto his bike and signaling the Iron Reapers to retreat once more. The engines roared, but this time they no longer echoed with ferocity, they carried the sound of defeat. Danny cheered and jumped to hug Edna. Mrs. Harper, you did it. They're running again, he shouted, his voice full of excitement. Frank, Jenny, and Walter burst into laughter, clapping as if they had just witnessed an unbelievable victory. Charlie turned to Edna, his smile wider than ever. You were right, Edna, he said. This isn't just our battle. This is Willow Creek's battle. And we just won the first round. Edna nodded, her gaze sweeping over the crowd, Mr. Henry, Mary, Mr. Hank, and dozens of others now standing with her. Just the first round, Charlie, she said, her voice low but full of meaning. Razor will be back, but this time, he'll face a whole town that's no longer afraid. The battle for the soul of Willow Creek has begun, and we'll fight to the end. The midday sun shone down on Willow Creek, illuminating the crowd gathered around Danny's gas station. Edna Harper stood among them, small in her gray sweater, but standing tall like a lighthouse in a storm. Charlie Grayson and the Thunder Riders held their ground at the front, their chrome motorcycles gleaming like a silent challenge. Danny ran back and forth, his face flushed with excitement as he shouted to everyone about their recent victory. The Iron Reapers, though more numerous with over 30 bikes, had been forced to retreat in the face of the unexpected unity between the Thunder Riders and the people of Willow Creek. Mr. Henry, Mary, Hank, and dozens of others stood there, their eyes no longer filled with fear, but shining with hope a glimmer that Edna knew was the beginning of something bigger. Frank clapped and laughed loudly, Jenny beamed brightly, and Walter nodded with the pride of someone who had seen victorious days. But Edna didn't let herself get swept up in the joy for too long. She turned to Charlie, her voice low but sharp. They'll be back, Charlie. Razor isn't the type to take a loss without retaliation. He'll come up with something not just to get his ego back, but to crush our spirits. She looked out at the main road, where the Iron Reapers had disappeared, but she knew the silence was only temporary. Charlie nodded, his hands on his hips, his sharp brown eyes scanning the crowd. You're right, Edna, he replied, his voice hoarse but full of determination. He won't leave us alone. I've seen guys like Razor in Vietnam. They don't know what losing is until they're beaten to a pulp. But this time, he's not just up against the Thunder Riders, he's up against the whole town. We need to be ready. Danny rushes in, his voice high-pitched with excitement mixed with anxiety. Mrs. Harper, this time they're way more numerous. What if Razor brings more people, or does something even worse? I mean, the Thunder Riders are strong, but how could we stand up against a whole gang like that? Edna placed her hand on Danny's shoulder, her gaze gentle but firm. Numbers don't make strength, Danny, she said, her voice deep and warm like a lesson learned from the darkest days. I've flown through skies where the enemy outnumbered us 10-1, but I survived not because I was stronger, but because I was smarter. We don't need to fight the Iron Reapers with fists, we'll win with our minds. Frank burst into laughter and clapped Danny on the shoulder. Listen to her, kid. Edna once flew a helicopter through fire and bullets. So if she says there's a way, I bet she's already come up with a whole plan. He turned to Edna, his eyes sparkling with curiosity. So what's your plan? Don't tell me your plan to call in another helicopter to bomb those guys. Edna gave a soft smile, but it quickly faded as she looked out at the crowd. No need for a helicopter, Frank, she said, her voice low but full of meaning. I learned something in Vietnam. Even the strongest enemy has a weakness, and the only way to win is to find it. Razor thrives on fear. He thinks if he threatens us enough, we'll bow down. But if we're not afraid, if we turn Willow Creek into a place he can't control, then he'll crumble. Charlie nodded, his eyes lighting up as if he had just figured something out. "You mean we hit him where it hurts, in his spirit," he said, his voice tinged with admiration. "No need for a fight. Just make him lose what he relies on everyone's fear." "But how do we pull that off when he's got a whole crowd ready to smash everything?" Edna turned back to look at the crowd. Mr. Henry with a broom in his hand, Ms. Mary standing next to a few other parents, Mr. Hank with his old bicycle, and a spark of determination shone in her eyes. "We start from here," she said, her voice ringing out like a call to action. "Let's show everyone in Willow Creek that they don't need to live in fear anymore. The Thunder Riders will protect the important places, the gas station, Mr. Henry's store, Ms. Mary's school. But we need everyone to join and not to fight, but to show Razor that he can't win when the whole town stands up." Jenny stepped forward, her voice soft but full of concern. "You mean turn all of Willow Creek into an army, Edna?" she asked, her hands tightly clasped together. "I agree that people are starting to hope, but if Razor comes back with an even bigger gang, how can we protect everyone? He could burn houses, smash up stores. I don't want to see anyone get hurt." Edna looked at Jenny, her gaze gentle but unwavering. "I don't want anyone to get hurt either, Jenny," she said, her voice deep and warm like a promise. "But I've seen this in Vietnam. The strongest enemy will crumble if we don't give them what they want. Razor wants fear. He wants control. If we protect each other, if we stand firm, he'll have nothing left to cling to. The Thunder Riders will be the shield, but the whole town will be the strength." Charlie signaled to the Thunder Riders to move forward, his voice echoing through the crowd. "Brothers, listen to Edna. We're splitting up one team at the gas station, one team at Henry's store, one team at the school. We won't let the Iron Reapers touch anyone or anything here. We won't strike first, but if they dare make a move, we'll show them that the Thunder Riders never back down." The united shout of the Thunder Riders echoed, strong as thunder, causing the crowd to buzz with excitement. Danny jumped up cheering. "Mrs. Harper, I'll help. I know where the Iron Reapers usually hang out. I'll lead the Thunder Riders there." He ran over to Charlie, his eyes blazing like a young soldier just given his first mission. But that hope didn't last long. As the sun reached its peak, a fierce sound echoed from the outskirts of Willow Creek. The roar of motorcycle engines, louder and more chaotic than ever before, like a tsunami approaching. Danny ran out from the gas station, his face turning pale as he looked into the distance. "Mrs. Harper, they're back!" he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "This time there are more of them. I see at least 40 bikes, and, oh my God, they've got trucks too." Charlie stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he looked down the road. "A truck?" he repeated, his voice lowering. "He's not just bringing more people. He's bringing something bigger. Edna, what do you think?" Edna stood still, her eyes scanning the crowd before focusing on the approaching sound. "He wants to make it big," she said, her voice calm yet sharp as a knife. "Razor doesn't just want to threaten. He wants to destroy, to set an example so no one dares to oppose him again. But we won't let him win. Charlie, split the Thunder Riders as planned, and Danny, you lead the way." The Iron Reapers rolled in, not just a motorcycle gang, but a terrifying force of over 40 bikes, followed by 2 pitch-black trucks kicking up dust like a war cloud. Razor led the charge, his face flushed with anger, eyes blazing as he spotted the Thunder Riders and the crowd of onlookers behind them. He stopped his bike about 15 yards from the gas station, his crew spreading out. Some guys gripped baseball bats, others brandished switchblades, and from the trucks, wooden crates were dragged out, the smell of gasoline wafting from them, making the air heavier than ever. Razor stepped out of the car, his boots slamming hard on the pavement, his voice roaring like thunder. "Old lady, you think this crowd and your empty words are going to stop me?" he bellowed, pointing straight at Edna. "I've called in more brothers from 3 other counties. The Iron Reapers are bigger and stronger than ever. I'll burn this gas station down, smash every store, and I'll make this whole town beg me for mercy. You and your gang of old bikers will regret ever challenging me." Charlie stepped up, standing protectively in front of Edna, his gaze as cold as steel. "What do you want to burn, kid?" he growled, his hand clenched into a fist. "You think bringing more people and a few cans of gas is enough to scare us? The Thunder Riders have seen things 100 times worse than you. Edna Harper once pulled me out of the line of fire. Who the hell do you think you are, messing with her?" Razor burst into a loud, maniacal laugh, full of malice. "You think I'm scared, old man?" he shouted back, signaling his gang to move forward. "The Iron Reapers don't bow down to anyone. I'll show you and that old lady the price of going against me, starting with this run-down gas station." He turned to his gang and yelled, "Burn it down!" A guy from the Iron Reapers stepped forward, holding a gas can and a match, his eyes gleaming with ferocity. Danny backed away, his hands trembling, his voice cracking. "Mrs. Harper, they're really going to burn it. What are we going to do now?" Edna gripped Danny's hand tightly, her eyes never leaving Razor. "Don't be scared, Danny," she said, her voice as steady as a rock in a raging river. "He wants us to panic, but we won't give him that. Charlie, keep the Thunder Riders standing strong, and everyone stay behind them. We won't fight, but we won't run either." Charlie signaled for the Thunder Riders to hold their position, their formation unwavering, like a steel wall ready to face the flames. But then, something unexpected happened. Mr. Henry stepped forward, broom raised high in his hand, his voice trembling but resolute. "Razor, if you want to burn something, burn me first. I won't let you destroy Willow Creek anymore." Mary stepped up next, pulling a few other parents along, her eyes blazing. "We're not afraid of you anymore." Mr. Hank rode up on his bike, standing next to Danny, his voice hoarse. "You're not the boss here, Razor." The whole crowd of townspeople began to move forward, not with weapons, but with the courage of each individual, each family, every familiar face from Willow Creek standing behind the Thunder Riders, forming a living wall that nothing could break. Razor took a step back, his eyes wavering as he saw the crowd growing larger. "You guys are crazy," he roared, but his voice now carried a hint of panic. Edna stepped forward, her eyes locked on Razor, her voice ringing out like a declaration. "You want war, Razor? You'll lose, not because we're stronger with our fists, but because we're smarter, more united. Burn down the gas station, and you'll only make this whole town rise up stronger." Razor gritted his teeth, his hand trembling as he looked at the crowd behind Edna and the Thunder Riders. He let out a final roar. "This isn't over yet." Then he jumped on his bike and signaled the Iron Reapers to retreat. The engines roared, but this time they carried a clear sense of defeat, not because they were outmatched in strength, but because they were outmatched in spirit. Charlie turned to Edna, his smile growing wider. "You did it, Edna," he said. Not a drop of gas was spilled, and Razor just found out he can't win this way. Edna nodded, her eyes scanning the cheering crowd. "This is just the beginning, Charlie," she said. "He'll be back, but this time we've got a strategy. We'll protect Willow Creek, not with violence, but with our minds and hearts." If your heart just skipped a beat seeing Edna and all of Willow Creek stand firm against Razor's flames, not with fists, but with courage, then hit that like button to support that spirit. And don't forget to like and subscribe to join us in witnessing stories of true strength, where human kindness triumphs over all darkness. You're a part of this journey, so stay with us. The sound of the Iron Reaper's engines faded as Razor and his gang retreated from Danny's gas station, leaving behind a cloud of dust and unused gas cans. Edna Harper stood in the midst of the Willow Creek crowd, her eyes following the last glimpse of the motorcycles disappearing around the corner. Charlie Grayson stood beside her, a broad smile on his lips, but his eyes still sharp as a soldier who hasn't left the battlefield. The Thunder Riders held their formation, their chrome motorcycles gleaming as a reminder that they were not just a biker gang, they were a force not easily defeated. Danny jumped up and cheered, hugging Edna with the strength of a young man who had just witnessed a miracle. "Mrs. Harper, you did it," he shouted, his voice hoarse with excitement. "They ran off again the second time today." Frank clapped and burst into a loud laugh, his voice echoing across the gas station lot. "I told you, Razor doesn't know who he just messed with. Edna, you've turned this whole town into an army without firing a single shot." Jenny smiled, her eyes shining with faith, while Walter nodded slowly, running his hand through his white hair as if remembering the victorious days of World War II. Mr. Henry, Sister Mary, Mr. Hank, and dozens of other townsfolk stood there, their eyes no longer filled with fear, but with determination and spirit that Edna knew would be Willow Creek's strongest weapon. But Edna didn't let the joy sweep her away too far. She turned to Charlie, her voice low but sharp. "He's not done yet, Charlie. Razor will be back, and this time it won't just be with a motorcycle and gas. He'll find a way to do something bigger, to crush our spirits before they can get stronger. We need to prepare." Charlie nodded, his hands on his hips, his eyes scanning the crowd before returning to Edna. "You're right," he replied, his voice hoarse but determined. "He lost face twice today. A guy like Razor won't let that slide. I bet he'll call in more people. Maybe bring something more dangerous than a few gas cans. But we won't let him win. The Thunder Riders will stay, and we'll stick to your plan." Danny rushes in, his voice tinged with worry but still burning with passion. "Mrs. Harper, what if he comes back with an even bigger crowd? I mean, we just managed to chase away over 40 motorcycles and 2 trucks. But what if next time it's 50 or even 100? What are we going to do?" Edna turned to Danny, her gaze gentle yet unflinching. "We don't need to count their numbers, Danny," she said, her voice deep and warm like a lesson from the past. "In Vietnam, I flew over skies where the enemy outnumbered us 10 to 1, with machine guns and anti-aircraft artillery everywhere. But I survived not because I had more people, but because I knew how to hit their weak spots. Razor wants us to be scared, but we won't give him that satisfaction. We'll win with strategy, not violence." Frank patted Danny on the shoulder, a big grin on his face. "Listen to her, kid. Edna once pulled me out of a bomb crater that I thought was the end for sure. If she says there's a way, I'm betting she's already got a plan from A to Z figured out." Charlie stepped forward, his voice ringing out like commander's. "So, what's your plan, Edna? You said we should hit Razor's spirit, and I agree, but what specifically? He's got a lot of people, weapons, and now definitely a deeply wounded ego. How do we make him crumble without bloodshed?" Edna turned back to look at the crowd of familiar faces from Willow Creek, from Old Man Henry with his broom in hand, to Mary with her fiery gaze, to Hank with his old bicycle. She took a deep breath, then spoke, her voice ringing out like a rallying cry. "We're going to make Willow Creek a place he can't control. Razor thrives on our fear, and we're going to take it away from him. The Thunder Riders will protect the important places, the gas station, the store, the school, but we need everyone to join in. No one runs, no one bows down. We'll show him that no matter how many he has, he can't win when this whole town stands up." Jenny nodded, her eyes lighting up as if she had just grasped something profound. "You mean turning all of Willow Creek into a living wall, right?" she asked, her voice soft yet filled with excitement. "Not fighting, but standing firm to show Razor that he can't threaten us anymore. But what if he really attacks? If he burns houses, smashes our stores, how do we keep everyone safe?" Edna looked at Jenny, her gaze as steady as a rock in a raging river. "We'll keep them safe by not giving him a chance," she said. "I learned this in Vietnam. The enemy is only strong when we let them act as they please. Razor wants to burn down the gas station. We'll protect it. He wants to smash up the store. We'll stand in front of the door. He'll soon see that every time he attacks, he only makes us stronger. The Thunder Riders are the shield, but the whole town will be the strength." Charlie burst into laughter and patted Edna on the shoulder. "You're a genius, Edna," he exclaimed, his voice full of admiration. "No fighting, no bloodshed. Just stand firm and let him fall apart on his own. I love this approach. Guys, listen to Edna. Let's spread out and protect every corner of Willow Creek. We won't let the Iron Reapers touch a single person or thing." The unified cheer of the Thunder Riders rang out, as powerful as thunder in a clear sky, causing the crowd to buzz with excitement. Danny cheered and ran over to Charlie. "I'll lead the way. I know where the Iron Reapers usually hang out will stop them before they can do anything." Mr. Henry stepped forward, holding his broom high. "I'll protect my store. If Razor wants to cause trouble, he'll have to go through me first." Mary nodded, pulling a few other parents along. "The school, too, will stand our ground there." Mr. Hank rode up on his bike, his voice hoarse. "I'll go alert the others all of Willow Creek. We'll know about this." Edna stood watching. feeling like a piece of her memory was coming back to life from the days she flew helicopters over the jungle, not just to rescue people, but to bring hope. Now, she's no longer in the cockpit, but she's still the guide, and Willow Creek is becoming an army that doesn't need weapons. She turned to Charlie, her voice low but full of meaning. "We need to move fast, Charlie. Razor won't give us much time to prepare. He'll be back, and this time, he'll try to do something bigger." Charlie nodded, signaling the Thunder Riders to split up. "All right, Edna," he said. "Team 1 at the gas station with Danny. Team 2 at Mr. Henry's store. Team 3 at the school with Mary. The rest will patrol around town to make sure the Iron Reapers don't sneak in. We'll stand strong, and we'll win this your way." But then, as the sun began to cast its shadows, another sound echoed from the distance, not the roar of motorcycles, but a heavier, deeper engine noise, like big trucks rolling over a suburban dirt road. Danny ran out from the gas station, his face turning pale as he looked toward the horizon. "Mrs. Harper," he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "They're back, but this time it's not just motorcycles. I see trucks, at least 3 of them, and, oh my God, they're carrying something huge." Charlie stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he looked toward the approaching sound. "A big truck," he repeated, his voice lowering. "He's not just bringing more people. He's bringing something to cause real destruction. Edna, what do you think?" Edna stood still, her gaze sweeping over the crowd before settling on the horizon, where a cloud of dust was rising like a dark storm. "He wants to make a big move," she said, her voice calm yet sharp as a knife cutting through the air. "Razor isn't just looking to threaten anymore. He wants to tear Willow Creek apart. So no one dares to stand against him ever again. But we won't let him win. Charlie, keep the Thunder Riders in position, and everyone get ready. We're not running. We're not scared. We're facing him head on." The Iron Reapers showed up again, not just with motorcycles, but with 3 huge black trucks, roaring like monsters. Razor stood on the lead truck, his face flushed with anger, his eyes blazing as he spotted the Thunder Riders and the crowd behind them. He jumped down, his boots hitting the pavement hard, pointing straight at Edna. "Old lady, you think this bunch can save you?" he bellowed, his voice crazed. "I brought a whole army, and this time I'll burn down Willow Creek if I have to. You and this town will kneel before me." Charlie stepped forward, his gaze as cold as ice. "You can bring as many people as you want, kid," he growled. "Willow Creek isn't scared of you, and I bet you won't dare do anything when the whole town stand behind us." Razor let out a maniacal laugh, then signaled to his gang. From the truck, large crates were pulled down, not just containing gasoline, but also heavy materials, as if he intended to bring down an entire street. "Burn it all!" he shouted, his voice trembling with rage. "I'll show you what it means to go against the Iron Reapers." Danny stepped back, his hands trembling, his voice shaky. "Mrs. Harper, they're really going to destroy everything. What are we going to do now?" Edna gripped Danny's hand tightly, her eyes never leaving Razor. "Don't be scared, Danny," she said, her voice as calm as a rock in the midst of a storm. "He wants us to run, but we're not going to run. Charlie, keep the Thunder Riders steady, and everyone, stand behind them. We'll show him that Willow Creek isn't easily intimidated." Charlie signaled to the Thunder Riders to hold their position, their formation unwavering, like a steel wall ready to face anything. The crowd of civilians advanced, not with weapons, but with courage. Mr. Henry, Ms. Mary, Mr. Hank, and dozens of others stood behind the Thunder Riders, their eyes blazing with indomitable spirit. Razor stepped back, his gaze faltering as he saw the crowd showing no fear, but he still roared, "Burn it! I'll show you." But then, something unexpected happened from behind the crowd. The sound of police sirens blared. Not just 1, but 3 patrol cars raced in, their lights flashing brightly. A police officer stepped out. It was Tom, the head of the local force, who had once been reluctant to confront the Iron Reapers, but now stood tall with a determined look in his eyes. "Enough, Razor," he shouted, his hand resting on the gun at his waist. "You want to burn down this town? Try it, but you won't get away with it." Razor turned back, his eyes filled with panic as he saw the police and the growing crowd. He let out a final roar. "This isn't over yet," then jumped onto his bike, signaling the Iron Reapers to retreat once more. The engines revved up, but this time they carried a clear sense of defeat, not because they lost by fists, but because they lost in spirit. Charlie turned to Edna, a bright smile on his lips. "You did it, Edna," he said. Not a single fire was started, and Razor just found out he can't win when a whole town stands together. Edna nodded, her gaze sweeping over the cheering crowd, from Danny to Mr. Tom, from the Thunder Riders to every citizen of Willow Creek. "This is our victory, Charlie," she said. "But it's not over yet. Razor will be back. We need to keep going, to be even smarter, to keep Willow Creek safe." Outside, the sunlight shone down on the crowd, laughter and cheers rising like a victory anthem. Razor might return with a larger force, but Edna knew that with smart strategy and unity, Willow Creek would never surrender. The evening sun faded over Willow Creek, casting a warm golden glow over the town, as if to soothe the wounds left by the Iron Reapers. Edna Harper stood in front of Danny's gas station, her gaze sweeping over the gathered crowd. Mr. Henry still clutched his broom tightly. Ms. Mary stood next to a few parents. Mr. Hank leaned against his old bicycle, and dozens of others who were no longer faces of fear, but reluctant warriors of this small town. Charlie Grayson and the Thunder Riders held their ground, their chrome motorcycles silent yet radiating an unstoppable strength. Danny ran up to hug Edna again, his face glowing as if he had just stepped out of a beautiful dream. "Mrs. Harper, do you see? We did it," he shouted, his voice ringing out over the cheering crowd. Razor ran away with his tail between his legs for the third time, and this time the police were here too. Frank clapped his hands and burst into laughter, his voice echoing across the gas station lot. "I told you, Edna, you just turned all of Willow Creek into an army without firing a single shot." Razor must be crying somewhere, his ego completely shattered. Jenny smiled, her eyes shining with faith, while Walter nodded slowly, running his hand through his white hair with pride. Tom, the police officer who had just led 3 patrol cars to the scene, stepped up beside Edna, a rare smile breaking across his stern face. "Mrs. Harper, I need to apologize for not acting sooner," he said, his voice deep but sincere. "But today, I see the whole town standing up, and I can't stand aside anymore." Edna turned to Mr. Tom, her gaze gentle but unwavering. "No need to apologize, Tom," she said, her voice warm like a mother forgiving her child. "What's important is that you're here now, and so is Willow Creek. We just showed Razor that he can't win with violence, but I know he's not done yet. He'll be back, and this time, he'll do something bigger." Charlie stepped forward, hands on his hips, his sharp brown eyes scanning the now quiet main street. "You're right, Edna," he said, his voice hoarse but determined. "He's been humiliated 3 times today. A guy like Razor won't let that slide. I bet he's rallying more people, maybe bringing something more dangerous than gas cans or iron bars. But we'll be ready. The Thunder Riders aren't going anywhere." Danny rushes in, his voice tinged with worry yet still burning with passion. "Mrs. Harper, what if he comes back with an even bigger crowd? I mean, this time we got the Thunder Riders and the police, but what if he brings, I don't know, bombs or something? How are we supposed to fight back against that?" Edna placed her hand on Danny's shoulder, her eyes gleaming with unwavering determination. "We don't need to fear things that haven't happened yet, Danny," she said, her voice deep but strong like a vow. "In Vietnam, I flew through skies where death lurked every turn, but I survived because I didn't let fear control me. Razor wants us to panic, but we won't give him that satisfaction. We'll keep standing strong, and we'll be smarter than him." Frank patted Danny on the shoulder, a huge grin on his face. "Listen to her, kid. Edna once pulled me out of a bomb crater I thought was the end of me. If she says we can win, I'm sure she's got a plan up her sleeve." He turned to Edna, his eyes sparkling with curiosity. "So, what's your plan? Don't tell me you're calling in reinforcements from somewhere else again." Edna gave a soft smile, but her eyes quickly darkened as she gazed toward the horizon, where shadows were slowly enveloping the distant hills. "We don't need more troops, Frank," she said, her voice low but full of meaning. "We already have enough Thunder Riders, police, and even Willow Creek. Now, we need to turn today's victory into something bigger spirit that Razor can't break. He'll be back, But this time, we'll show him that every time he attacks, he only makes us stronger. Charlie nodded, his eyes lighting up as if he had just grasped something profound. You mean to keep everyone's spirits high, right? He asked, his voice tinged with admiration. Not just protecting the town, but making all of Willow Creek a place that Razor can't touch not with strength, but with willpower. I like this approach. But what if he does something crazy? Edna turned back to look at the crowd, Mr. Henry, Sister Mary, Mr. Hank, and dozens of other townsfolk now standing tall, their eyes blazing with indomitable spirit. If he does something crazy, she said, her voice ringing out like a rallying cry, then we'll turn it into our strength. I've seen villages in Vietnam burn to the ground, but from the ashes, the people still rose up. Willow Creek will be the same. We won't just survive, we'll thrive. But before Edna's words could even settle, a horrifying sound echoed from the outskirts of Willow Creek. It wasn't the roar of a motorcycle or a truck, but a massive explosion, like a bomb had just gone off a few blocks away. The crowd jumped, some screamed, and Danny staggered back, his hands trembling. Mrs. Harper, what's going on? A column of black smoke rose from Mr. Henry's store, and right after, the sound of motorcycle engines revved up fiercely, more chaotic than ever. Charlie turned around, his eyes narrowing as he looked toward the rising smoke. He didn't wait, he growled, his hand clenching into a fist. Razor just did something, and this time he's not messing around. Guys, get in the car. We gotta get there now. Edna held Charlie's hand, her voice calm but sharp as a razor. Hold on, Charlie. This is what he wants to make us panic, to divide us. We're not going to chase after him. We'll face him on our own terms. She turned to Mr. Tom. Tom, you take your people over there and see what's going on. Charlie, keep the Thunder Riders here. We're not letting the gas station and the school get hit. Danny, you run and tell everyone to gather up. Officer Tom nodded, jumped into patrol car with two other cops, the siren blaring as they raced toward Henry's store. Danny ran off, shouting to the crowd, Everyone, follow me. We gotta stick together. Charlie signaled the Thunder Riders to hold their position, their formation unwavering, but his eyes were full of worry as he looked at Edna. Are you sure, Edna? If he burns down Henry's store, that's just the beginning. Edna nodded, her eyes fixed on the rising smoke. I'm sure, she said. He wants us to panic and scatter, but we won't do that. We'll stand firm, and we'll turn this into our advantage. The Iron Reapers showed up again, this time not just with motorcycles, but with a terrifying force of over 50 bikes and 3 big trucks, dust swirling like a war storm. Razor stood on the lead bike, his face twisted in madness, his eyes blazing as he spotted the Thunder Riders and the crowd behind them. He jumped off, his boots slamming hard onto pavement, holding a small device of remote control, and Edna knew exactly what it was. Old hag, he bellowed, his voice crazed. You think you've won? I just blew up Henry's store, and this is just the beginning. I've got enough bombs to level all of Willow Creek. If I can't have this town, then no one will. The crowd fell silent. A few people screamed in panic, but Edna stepped forward, standing in front of Razor, her eyes unwavering. You want to destroy Razor? She said, her voice ringing out like a declaration amidst the roar of the engines. Go ahead and do it, but you won't win. Every time you tear down, we'll rebuild. Every time you burn, we'll grow stronger. Willow Creek doesn't belong to you, it belongs to us. Charlie stepped forward, his eyes as cold as ice. You dare to mess with the bomb, kid, he growled. You're not just a thug, you're a madman. But you won't get away with this. The Thunder Riders and this whole town won't let you cause chaos anymore. Razor burst into a maniacal laugh, his hand holding the controller high. I'll show you all, he screamed, his finger trembling over the button. I'll burn it all down, starting with that crappy school. He pressed a button, and a massive explosion echoed from Mary's school, black smoke rising, the crowd screaming in terror. Danny clutched his head, his voice faltering. Mrs. Harper? He's gone crazy. What are we going to do? Mary screamed, running toward the school, but Edna grabbed her arm, her eyes never leaving Razor. Don't run, Mary, she said, her voice calm but full of strength. He wants us to be scared. We won't give him that. Razor roared, pressing the button again, but this time no explosion sounded. His controller seemed to be broken. He turned around, his eyes filled with panic as he saw his underlings starting to waver, a few stepping back, their eyes full of doubt. "Burn it all down!" he shouted, but no one obeyed. His madness had crossed a line that even the Iron Reapers didn't want to cross. Charlie stepped closer, his voice icy. "You've lost, Razor. You can burn, you can destroy, but you can't break our spirit. Look around. You've got no one standing behind you anymore." Razor turned around, his eyes filled with panic as he saw the crowd of people not fleeing but advancing, standing behind the Thunder Riders, their eyes blazing with indomitable spirit. Mr. Tom returned from Mr. Henry's store, his voice booming to the patrol car's loudspeaker. "Razor, drop the controller, you're busted." Razor let out one final roar, but his hand trembled as he looked at the crowd, the Thunder Riders and the police now surrounding him. He threw the controller to the ground, shouting, "This isn't over yet." Then he jumped on his bike, but before he could take off, a cop shot his tire, causing him to crash to the ground. Edna stood still, her eyes fixed on Razor as he was handcuffed, her voice deep but resonant. "You were wrong, Razor. This ending isn't because of your violence, but because of our strength." The crowd cheered, laughter and shouts rising like a victory song. But Edna knew the battle had reached its climax, and now was the time to rise from the ashes. Darkness began to descend on Willow Creek, draping the town in a quiet veil of night after the fierce storm that Razor and the Iron Reapers brought. Edna Harper stood in the middle of Danny's gas station lot, her eyes following Razor as he was handcuffed by Mr. Tom and two police officers, his face twisted with anger and defeat as he was shoved into a patrol car. The sound of the car horn blared briefly and then faded as they drove away, leaving behind a space filled with strange silence, not the silence of fear, but the silence of victory. Charlie Grayson stood next to Edna, the smile on his lips fading, replaced by a contemplative gaze as he looked toward the column of smoke still rising from Mr. Henry's store and Mary's school. The Thunder Riders held their positions, their chrome motorcycles now silent, like soldiers who had just completed their mission. Danny hugged Edna again, his voice choked with emotion. "Mrs. Harper, we won. He can't do anything to us anymore." Frank stepped forward, clapping Danny on the shoulder, a broad grin on his face. "You did it, kid." Edna just gave Razor a lesson he'll never forget, without even firing a shot. "I bet he's crying in the police car right now, totally crushed." Jenny smiled, her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes shining with faith, while Walter nodded slowly, stroking his white hair with pride. Mr. Henry, Sister Mary, Mr. Hank, and dozens of other townspeople stood around Edna, their eyes no longer filled with panic, but with resilience of spirit forged in the ashes of what Razor tried to destroy. Edna turned to Charlie, her voice deep but warm. "We won this round, Charlie, but not without a cost. Mr. Henry's store and Mary's school, we need to rebuild them, and we need to do it right now." She looked out at the crowd, her voice rising like a call to action. "Today, we didn't just chase Razor away, we showed all of Willow Creek that we're stronger than anything he could throw at us. Now it's time for us to revive." Charlie nodded, his eyes gleaming with determination. "You're right, Edna," he replied, his voice hoarse but strong. "He burned down the store and the school to scare us, but he doesn't know that we won't just survive, we'll rise from those very ruins. The Thunder Riders will help us. We got brothers who built houses, fixed bikes, done everything. Brothers, are you ready?" The unified cheer of the Thunder Riders resounded, not too loud, but enough to get the crowd buzzing with excitement. Danny ran up, his voice high-pitched. "Mrs. Harper, I'll help more. I can bring water, bring stuff, anything you need." Mr. Henry stepped forward, his voice trembling but determined. "My store might burn down, but I'll rebuild it with everyone here. I'm not afraid of anything anymore." Mary nodded, her eyes blazing. "The school, too, will fix it, so the kids won't have to be scared of the Iron Reapers anymore." Edna smiled, this time a genuine smile, though still subtle. "Then let's get started," she said, her voice deep but full of strength. "Today, we're not just protecting Willow Creek. We're going to make it stronger than ever. Razor wants to destroy us, but he's just given us a chance to rise again." Officer Tom stepped forward. taking off his police hat with a respectful nod. "Mrs. Harper, I'll report this to my superiors," he said. "Razor and the Iron Reapers won't get off easy. We found enough evidence in their truck to put them away for a few decades. But you're right, the important thing now is rebuilding Willow Creek. I'll call in more folks from a neighboring town to help." Edna nodded, her eyes lighting up as she watched the crowd start to disperse. Not to flee, but to take action. Mr. Henry led a few people toward his burnout store, where smoke still rose from the rubble. Mary pulled a group of parents toward the school, their laughter echoing among the smoke-stained walls. Danny ran around, bringing water and calling more people from the nearby streets. The Thunder Riders split their formation. One group followed Mr. Henry, another followed Mary, and one group stayed at the gas station with Charlie, ready to defend if the Iron Reapers dared to return. But Edna knew Razor had lost, not just because he was captured, but because his spirit was broken. She stood still, watching the scene unfold before the people of Willow Creek. From those who once bowed to the Iron Reapers, now working together, laughing together, rebuilding from the ashes. She remembered the villages in Vietnam, where she had flown over places devastated by bombs. But the people still rose up, replanting rice, rebuilding their homes. Willow Creek was the same, not just surviving, but reviving. Charlie stepped up beside her, his eyes softening as he looked at the crowd. "You did the impossible, Edna," he said, his voice deep but warm. "Today isn't just a victory, it's a beginning. Razor burned 2 places, but you set the whole town on fire in a different way. You set it ablaze with hope." Edna turned to Charlie, her eyes gleaming with a subtle pride. "Not me, Charlie," she said. "It's all of us. I just lit the spark, but everyone here keeps it burning. Razor wanted to destroy Willow Creek, but he just helped us find ourselves again." Danny ran back, his face covered in dust but beaming. "Mrs. Harper, Mr. Henry said his store only burned halfway. We can save a lot of stuff. And Mary said the school isn't too bad, just a few walls are damaged, but we'll fix them right away." He paused, panting, then burst into a huge laugh. "I can't believe we just defeated Razor, and now we're rebuilding everything." Frank burst in, his voice full of excitement. "The kid's right. Edna, do you see? The whole town is working as a team. I've never seen Willow Creek this united since the festival back in '80. Jenny nods, her eyes lighting up. "This isn't just about rebuilding. It's a message. Razor loses not because we're stronger with our fists, but because we're stronger with our hearts." Edna stood still, her eyes scanning the faces of Danny, Charlie, Frank, Jenny, Walter, Mr. Henry, Sister Mary, Mr. Hank, and Mr. Tom. She felt something she had once felt in Vietnam. The strength of community, the power of people who not only survived but rose from the ashes. She stepped forward in the crowd, her voice ringing out like a promise. "Today, we didn't just defeat Razor, we conquered our own fears. From these ashes, Willow Creek will rise again, stronger and more united. Razor thought he could destroy us, but he just helped us find our soul again." The crowd cheered, laughter and voices ringing out like a victory song. Mr. Henry raised his broom high, laughing loudly. "Let's rebuild, everyone!" Mrs. Mary shouted to parents. "The school will reopen next week." Mr. Hank rode his bike, calling more people from the town's nooks and crannies. The Thunder Riders started working, hands that once held guns now holding hammers and wood, rebuilding what was lost. Edna stood watching, her eyes softening as the moonlight began to appear in the sky over Willow Creek. She remembered her days in Vietnam, the night she flew through fire and bullets, the time she saw people rising from rubble. Now Willow Creek was the same, not just a small town, but a symbol of rebirth. Razor had lost, not just because he was captured, but because he couldn't break the spirit of those standing with Edna. Charlie stepped forward and placed his hand on her shoulder. "You did it, Edna," he said, his voice warm and deep. "Willow Creek will never forget this day, and it all started with your call." Edna smiled, her gaze fixed on the distance where the moonlight illuminated the streets now filled with laughter and chatter. "It's not just a call, Charlie," she said. "It's faith that from the ashes we can rise again. And today, we've proven that." The full moon hung suspended in the sky over Willow Creek, casting light on the streets now bustling with laughter and the steady sound of hammering. Edna Harper stood in the middle of Danny's gas station lot, her gaze sweeping over the scene before her, a town once trembling under the iron reapers, now rising from the ashes left by Razor. Mr. Henry led a few townspeople in clearing the rubble of the store, his laughter ringing out as they found an intact crate amidst the charred wood. Mary stood in front of the school, directing the parents to rebuild the damaged walls, her voice full of life amidst the dim glow of flashlights. Mr. Hank cycled around town, whistling a cheerful tune as he brought news to every corner. Charlie Grayson and the Thunder Riders were still there, their strong hands now wielding hammers and crowbars instead of fists, helping to rebuild what was lost. Danny ran over, his face covered in dust but glowing like the moon above. "Mrs. Harper, do you see?" he shouted, his voice high with excitement. "We're rebuilding everything faster than I thought. Mr. Henry said his store will reopen in a few days, and Mary said the school will be ready for the kids next week. Razor's totally lost. He can't break us." He jumped up, hugging Edna with the force of a gust of wind, making her let out a rare but warm smile. Charlie stepped forward, wiping the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve, a broad smile on his lips but his eyes gleaming with pride. "You did the impossible, Edna," he said, his voice hoarse but full of emotion. "Today, you didn't just chase Razor away. You turned Willow Creek into a place I've never seen before. From the ashes, you brought rebirth. I bet even in Vietnam, you never did anything this grand." Edna turned to Charlie, her gaze gentle but unwavering. "Not exactly, Charlie," she said, her voice deep and warm like a story told by campfire. "In Vietnam, I saw villages burned by bombs, but the people still rose up, replanted their rice, and rebuilt their homes. I'm not doing this alone, I'm just lighting the fire, and everyone here is keeping it burning. Razor wants to destroy us, but he doesn't know that true strength doesn't lie in fists or bombs, it lies in the heart." Frank walks in, clapping Danny on the shoulder, a huge grin on his face. "Listen to her, kid. Edna just gave this whole town a lesson that I bet Razor will never get. Real power isn't about destruction, it's about building. I've never seen Willow Creek, so united even the 80s festival doesn't compare." He laughs loudly, his voice echoing across the gas station lot, causing a few locals to turn and look with smiles on their faces. Jenny stepped forward, her hands tightly clasped together, her eyes shining with a mix of faith and concern. "Edna, I agree that we won," she said, her voice soft but sincere, "but I still can't believe how we pulled it off. Razor had a whole crowd. He had bombs. He was so crazy that I thought we were going to lose everything. What made you believe that we could stand up to him?" Edna turned to Jenny, her eyes sinking as if gazing into a distant memory. "I once thought I would lose everything, Jenny," she said, her voice slow but heavy with emotion. "In Vietnam, there were nights I flew helicopters through gunfire, not knowing if I'd live to land. I saw my comrades fall. Jimmy Tate, a young pilot with a smile like sunshine, died on a mission I couldn't reach in time to save. Sarah Klein, a nurse who flew with me, was shot while bandaging a wounded soldier. In those moments, I was scared too, but I didn't let fear control me. I believed that if we stood up, if we held on to each other, nothing could break us. And today, I see that in Willow Creek." The crowd gradually fell silent, listening to Edna, her voice ringing out in the darkness like a guiding light. Danny stood still, his eyes wide open as if he had just realized something profound. Charlie nodded slowly, his gaze softening as he remembered the days in Hugh, where Edna had once pulled him out of the line of fire. Frank stopped laughing, his hand resting on Jenny's shoulder with a thoughtful look. Mr. Henry, Sister Mary, Mr. Hank, and the other townspeople moved closer, their eyes shining with respect not only for Edna, but for themselves, the ones who had stood firm against the storm that Razor brought. Edna took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping over each face before she continued. "Razor thinks strength is about burning, about destroying, but he's wrong. True strength is what we're doing now, rebuilding from the ashes, standing up after every blow, and holding on to each other when everything falls apart. Today, we didn't just beat him, we conquered our own fears. And that's the message I want Willow Creek to remember forever." Charlie stepped forward, his voice lowering but full of emotion. "You're right, Edna. Today isn't just about Razor. It's about us, I used to think strength was about fists, guns, and surviving wars. But you showed me something different, the strength of the heart of the community. Willow Creek will never forget this day. Danny steps in, his voice soft but firm. Mrs. Harper, I'm going to tell this story to everyone, not just here, but in other towns too. I want them to know what you and the Thunder Riders did, so they see that we don't need to be afraid of guys like Razor. He clenches his fists, his eyes blazing like a small flame just ignited. Edna smiled and placed her hand on Danny's shoulder. Go ahead and tell the story, Danny, she said. But don't just talk about me or the Thunder Riders. Talk about Willow Creek, about Mr. Henry, Mary, Mr. Hank, and everyone here. This isn't just one person's victory, it's the whole town's triumph. Officer Tom stepped forward, taking off his police hat once again, his voice ringing out to the crowd. Mrs. Harper, I just got word from the higher-ups that Razor and the rest of the Iron Reapers won't be getting out of jail for a long time. We found enough evidence in their truck, bombs, weapons, enough to put them away for life. But you were right. It's not about him losing, it's about us winning. Willow Creek will be a lesson to anyone who thinks they can bully a small town like ours. The crowd cheered again, but this time it wasn't a cheer of victory. It was a cheer of faith that they had overcome the darkness to find the light once more. Edna stood still, her gaze fixed on the moonlight, reminiscing about her days in Vietnam, those nights she flew through gunfire, not just to save lives, but to bring hope. Now, she had done it again, not in a helicopter, but on the streets of Willow Creek. She felt a rare sense of peace, not because the battle was over, but because she knew this town would never forget today's lesson. Charlie stood beside her, his gaze softening as he watched the crowd gradually disperse, returning to their construction work. You know, Edna, he said, his voice deep and warm, when you called me today, I thought we were just coming to chase off a bunch of kids. But you did so much more. You changed all of Willow Creek, and maybe even me too. Edna turned to Charlie, her eyes gleaming with a subtle pride. It's not just me who changed, Charlie, she said. We did it together. I just believe that from the ashes, we can rise again, and today, everyone here has proven that. True strength isn't about defeating enemies, but about helping ourselves and those who've lost their way find the light again. Danny ran back, carrying a cup of water from the gas station, and handed it to Edna with a beaming smile. Mrs. Harper, I just told Mr. Henry, and he said from now on, everyone will call you the heart of Willow Creek. What do you think? He paused, his eyes full of anticipation. Edna chuckled softly, taking the glass of water from Danny. I don't need a title, Danny, she said, her voice gentle yet full of meaning. I'm just an old lady who flew helicopters, saw darkness, and believed that light was always somewhere. Today, I see that light here in you, in Charlie, in everyone. Frank chuckled during their last conversation, his voice cheerful. You may not need a title, Edna, but Willow Creek won't forget you. I bet from now on, every time someone mentions the Iron Reapers, they'll talk about the day you and this whole town taught Razor a lesson he'll never forget. Edna stood still, her gaze fixed on the moon, then drifting down to the streets now glowing with flashlight beams and hope. She recalled her first call with Charlie, a phone call she thought was just to shoo away some kids, but it ended up igniting the whole Willow Creek. She remembered her days in Vietnam, where she learned that the real battle wasn't against an external enemy, but against the darkness within, and the greatest victory wasn't defeating it, but leading it back to the light. The crowd slowly dispersed, the sound of hammers still tapping steadily, laughter still ringing out, but the atmosphere now was serene, complete. Edna stood there, small amidst Willow Creek, but in her heart was a deep sense of peace. Razor had lost, not just because he was captured, but because he couldn't break the spirit of a town that had found itself again. And in that moonlight, Edna knew that the deepest message of the day was not just victory, but a belief that from darkness, light can always be reborn. Thanks for joining Edna Harper and Willow Creek on this journey from a 90-year-old woman facing down a gang of thugs to an entire town standing up with courage and unity. We truly appreciate every second you've spent here, witnessing that real strength isn't about violence, but about the heart and an unbreakable spirit. If this story touched you, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on our next inspiring journeys. From the ashes, they rose again. That's the message Edna left us. That light can always find its way through the darkness. Goodbye, folks. Thanks for being a part of this story, and see you in our next video. Stay tough, stay proud, and see you soon.